Hey everybody, and Tony here with a review of Dvorak's Rusalka, which was shown at the Praha Statni Opera. The conductor was Jiří Strunch, the stage director was Zdeněk Trojška, the set designer was Milan Ferencik, the costume designer was Josef Jelinek, the choreographer was Dana Moravkova, the chorus master was Adolf Merichar, and the dramaturgy was handled by Yitka Slavikova. Now, Dvorak's Rusalka has been inspired by two fairy tales. One was Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid, and the other one was Undine. Now, what do these three have in common? Namely, The Little Mermaid, Rusalka, and Undine. Well, it tells the story of a sea creature who falls in love with a prince, wants to be human, but then suffers tragic consequences. Now, in this opera, we see the curiosity of Rusalka, much like how Ariel is in the Disney movie of The Little Mermaid. She's very curious of how the human world works. However, her father, the water gnome, known in Czech as Vodnik, has something against it, and he forbids her. But she is very persistent about it, so Vodnik kind of gives in and says, you might as well go visit Yetzibaba, or the witch. So, well, you know what happens in The Little Mermaid. Okay, so she decides to sacrifice her voice in order to become human, and for that, people see her as weird and, well, strange and all that, and not of this world. The prince at first is entranced by her beauty, and there's always something mysterious about her. However, the foreign princess has set her eyes on the prince and pretty much belittles Rusalka just like everyone else, while she wants to claim the prince for herself. However, the prince and Rusalka get married, so when the water gnome casts a curse on the prince, well, the foreign princess dumps him, and it doesn't end tragically from here. Rusalka gets turned into a will-o-wisp, and then when she kisses the prince, he dies, and she's left to wander in the spirit world. So, unlike the ending in The Little Mermaid, well, the original Little Mermaid, in which the mermaid throws herself to the ocean and then gets turned to sea foam and becomes the spirit of the air, Rusalka just simply gets turned into a lost spirit. Yeah, both of them have a very tragic ending, so no Disney ending here, honeys. So, yeah. Rusalka is also very well known for two arias. Well, one aria is basically well known than the other, and that is Rusalka's Song to the Moon, which is Mesichku na nebi hlubokem, which has been sung by a lot of different sopranos, whether they be lyrics, full lyrics, or spintos. And each one of them have something very special to bring to this aria, but it's safe to say if sung correctly, it can really tug at your heartstrings, and it can really make your heart soar like it has never soared before. And then there's another aria that has also been quite well known, and that is, of course, Yetzibaba's aria, which is sung by a mezzo called Shuri Muri Fuk, known in English as either Abracadabra or Hocus Pocus. So yes, Dvorak's Rusalka really has a lot of interesting elements to it, and not to mention it's a fairy tale opera. What more can you say about it? And an opera that I was so curious to watch, and after seeing it for the first time, I have to say that I enjoyed every single moment of it. And let's find out why as I talk about the production, the singers, and the conducting. Now, the production of this opera, as you'd expect from a fairy tale opera, should look gorgeous, appealing, and simply put, dreamlike. And I have to say that the production was just so breathtaking. It's everything that I've expected in a production of Rusalka and more. Everything was so flawlessly done. The backdrops, the costumes, the choreography, everything was just so flawlessly and gorgeously done. And it's also helped by today's technology because we see in the first few moments of the opera, or even of each act, that there are like moving images. In the first act, we see a moving image of a lake, and then we see it also in the backdrop, where we also see like the moving images of a forest and a lake, and even a like a forest fire to symbolize that this is now Yetsibaba's domain. And then we also see in the second act an image of a castle, which symbolizes that this is where the prince lives and is holding his party. And then in the third act, we see a forest that is destroyed, or like a certain ominous mist that surrounds it, giving an air of mystery. And it's also helped by the use of the lighting, which can really evoke the situations that the characters get themselves into. With Yetzibaba, it's all red, and it's in the Prince's Palace, it's like a shade of bright colors, usually yellow and orange, but very vibrant and bright. And then in the domain of Vodnik the water gnome and his daughters, it's like a greenish, bluish hue with some shades of purple thrown in the mix. So the colors were used very vibrantly, and it added a certain type of liveliness to it. What more can you say about a fairy tale opera like this? Not to mention, what more can I say about the costumes? They were all elegant. My personal favorite has to be the foreign princess's costume. It is just so gorgeous, and not to mention, I'm a huge sucker for red. It's my favorite color, of course. It was just so gorgeous to look at, and I have to say, the costume designers really went out of their way to really make these costumes as authentic as possible, and also to make them appealing as possible. So, yes, the production and the costumes absolutely flawless. There was nothing that struck me out as out of place, and everything was done flawlessly. And now let's get to the singers. In the title role of Rusalka, we have Yitka Burgatova. Now, Yitka Burgatova has been very well known in the roles of the full lyric repertoire, and seeing her tonight, she did fine. She wasn't great, nor was she terrible. She's absolutely fine all around. She was a really great interpreter of Rusalka, and she was also a very decent musician. However, there were some problems that I found in her voice, such as the shrillness that I've heard, especially in her invocation to the moon. I did notice some elements of shrillness being used, especially in the high notes. Sure, that same shrillness was still there, but I'm sure that if she could give herself a lot more time, or if time passes on, then I'm sure that shrillness would probably be dissipated. But as of now, that shrillness is still there, which kind of marred my enjoyment, but not too much. Though suffice to say, she was still a very convincing actress, portraying all of the emotions of Rusalka, her girlishness in the first act, her insecurities, and her enigmatic nature in the second act, and her even more enigmatic nature, and even her slightly dangerous nature in the final act. She was a very decent musician. However, even though I did have a few problems with her shrillness, especially in the high notes, I still have to say she was a very decent interpreter, and I still enjoyed her in this part. Playing the prince was Luciano Mastro, an Italian tenor who has had a very successful career singing a lot of the roles in the bel canto repertoire and some roles in the Czech repertoire, most notably as Edgardo from Lucia di Lammermoor, Stefa from Janufa, and the Duke from Rigoletto. What a very solid instrument this gentleman had. Not to mention, he's very dashing. He was absolutely handsome. He really looked like a prince. And he looked also like a movie star. He was very dashing on stage. He had dashing good looks, and he was able to play the prince very well. He was able to play his youthfulness. He was able to play his ardence, and he was able to play his first love of Rusalka, but then his weirded out nature of how he feels about her, and his attraction to the foreign princess. And his voice was very solid. It was really helped by the fact that he's done a lot of bel canto roles in the past. So these roles have really helped his voice and have really shaped his voice. Not to mention, it's a very solid technique that he used. Like I said, it's all helped through the bel canto roles that he has been singing, which have helped his voice, and especially with that C sharp at the third act. Yes, it didn't sound too much of a ping, but it was still a solid C sharp, and a very exciting one at that. Not to mention, like I said, his voice was very solid, no problems there. It's a very solid instrument. It was well handled, and the notes were navigated very well, and his interpretation of the prince was absolutely solid. Playing the role of Vodnik the Water Gnome, we have Roman Wotzel, who is a basso cantante who at times specializes in the character-based roles, though can also perform some of the basso profondo roles, like the Commendatore from Don Giovanni. A very solid singer, a very fine technique, and an equally imposing figure on stage. He was able to portray the imposing nature of the water gnome. He was able to portray his sternness very well, but he's also able to portray his lightheartedness as well, his softer side as well, making him a very multidimensional character aside from just the gruff, angry, and overprotective father. You could also see that he is also portraying him as a multidimensional character, showing him that yes, he's firm, but he also cares for his daughters as well. And like I said, his voice had a very solid technique, very great low notes, and a very focused tone. What more can I say about Mr. Wotzel as Vodnik, the water gnome? And then we have Yetzbaba, sung by Yana Sikorova, a dramatic mezzo who specializes in not just the dramatic mezzo repertory, but also that of the lyric mezzo repertory, like Charlotte from Werther. I was quite skeptical at first, given her experience of singing roles like, let's say, Charlotte from Werther, Carmen, and Fenena from Nabucco. But as I saw her, I was absolutely blown away at just how much of a focused voice she has, and an imposing stage presence, and not to mention her Churimuri Fuk, solidly sung. It was a very gorgeous instrument. Not just gorgeous, but homogeneous in all the registers. It was powerful enough to be very dramatic and very captivating as well. Yes, she may not have the Wagnerian dimensions of, let's say, Elena Nicolai or Margareta Klose or Karin Brancel, or she may not have those the exciting timbre of Ebestignani, or she may not have that rough tone that's usually associated with the late great Elena Obraztsova, but she held her own very well. In fact, there were moments when she was singing that she almost reminded me of Christa Ludwig. It was kind of reflected on her voice, and I mean it as a compliment. It had that same type of sheen and power and luster that was totally there. And I definitely enjoyed her performance. Oh, and speaking of sort of comparing, yeah, like I said, with terms of Burgatova's Rusalka, yeah, like I said, she may not have that like mellifluous tone like Elisabeth Gruma, or that even more gorgeous tone like Elisabeth Schwarzkopf. But like I said, very solid portrayal and a lot of fun. The same thing can be said about Yana Sikorova, but it's still a very solid instrument, and it was just simply put a lot of fun watching this young dramatic mezzo portray such a thankless role, because the way I see it, Yetzi Baba is a very thankless role for any dramatic mezzo or contralto. So she was able to pull this role off extremely well. And then in the role of the foreign princess, we have Yitka Zvobodova. Now, Yitka Zvobodova is a very interesting soprano. She started out singing the light lyric repertoire of Zerlina, and then she graduated into more full lyric roles like Rusalka before graduating to the role of the foreign princess. Other roles that she sung, let me check right here. Oh, yeah, she also sang Donna Elvira from Don Giovanni, and she also sang the roles of the Countess and Giulietta from the Marriage of Figaro and Tales of Hoffmann, respectively. I was quite skeptical at first because I thought that she wouldn't really hold herself really well, since the foreign princess is a very interesting part, mostly because a lot of spinto sopranos, dramatic sopranos, hell, even high dramatic mezzos sing this role. In fact, this role was originally composed for a dramatic soprano, and ever since then, a lot of sopranos and mezzos have all flocked to sing this superb character part. You had spinto sopranos like Emily McGee, Christine Chizinski, and Nancy Weisbach singing this role. Then you had dramatic sopranos like Eva Urbanova and Christine Gerke singing this. And then comes the high dramatic mezzos with the likes of Eva Randova and Yoba Braun. And there were also some mezzos who sang both Yetzibaba and The Foreign Princess. I still think that Miss Zvobodova sang this role very well, and she actually quite surprised me. She had such a decent tone to her voice, and she was able to make the princess a very haughty and arrogant character, and at the same time, deliciously nasty. I really enjoyed her portrayal as an actress. She was absolutely convincing as such a catty princess. She was able to bring out that cattiness, and not to mention that haughtiness that makes her so lovingly despicable, for lack of a better word. She really brought the character to life. Yes, yes, she may not have that extra bite that made singers like Leonie Rezanek, Renata Tebaldi, Ingrid Bjorna, Gina Chinya, Maria Caniglia, and many other great spinto sopranos like Leontine Price, extremely well known. But she's still young. She still has a lot of time for her voice to fully develop, and I could see that it's slowly developing into a lot more mature voice. And it's also helped by the fact that she really knew how to act the hell out of this role. It's a very thankless part as well, and she did a fantastic job making the princess a very catty character yet a very enjoyable type of caddy. It was, like I said, very enjoyable to see this this singer do her part very well, and I really hope to see a lot more of her. And then we have the minor roles. In the roles of the gamekeeper and the kitchen boy, we have the baritone Jan Jacek and the light lyric soprano Elena Miro. Now, Jan Jacek has a very, very mellifluous voice, and it may not be powerful, but it's still a very gorgeous sounding instrument, and it's still a very homogeneous instrument that can make this thankless role come to life. In the case of Elena Miro as the kitchen boy, she was able to make the kitchen boy a very fun, loving, and very also naive character. But it's that endearing type of naivete that she really brought the best out of this character. Also helped by her voice, which was very focused, clean, and had a very solid technique. In fact, their chemistry with one another was just simply put the absolute top. And then we have the three wood nymphs sung by Hanna Yonashova, Erika Vochelova-Yarkovska, and Alzbieta Fomachkova. Now, these three singers have sung very well together. In fact, their trio remind me of the Nymphs trio, you know, the ones with the Naiad, Dryad, Echo from Ariadne auf Naxos, and also the Three Boys trio of Zauberflöte. They really brought out the best of their roles, and their voices blended out very gorgeously. With Yonasiova's high soprano voice, and with Vochelova Yarkovska's more lyrical voice, and then with Alzbieta Pomachkova's more mezzo-y voice, they really blended really well, giving a lot of different colors and a lot of chemistry to work with. And then we have The Hunter, sung by Yuri Hayek, who I also saw about 3 days ago as Don Giovanni. A very solid singer, and in a very thankless part, he could still make an impression. And the conducting done by Maestro Yuri Strunch was very solid, though I do wish that they could have slowed down the tempo of the Song to the Moon, because I felt like it was a bit too fast, too rapid, though it should have been a lot more lento and a lot more graceful instead of rushing through the passages, because I felt like it was a bit too rushed. But nonetheless, despite that one little flaw, it was still a very enjoyable experience overall. So, by far, this is one of the best productions that I've seen so far in Prague of Rusalka. I really enjoyed the singers, and I'm sure that in a few years' time, they'll be greater than they are already. And the scenography and the costumes were just simply put the absolute best that I've ever seen. So if you haven't seen this opera already, I highly suggest that you go check it out. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for my review of Puccini's Turandot. Until then, good night, everybody.